V and all that stuff, yeah. All right. Now, before we get into the other places from which people may be experiencing the world, let's push this a little bit about how does this theory affect our practice of professional communication. Let me make sure we're going here because I want to make sure we're getting this up on the web. Yep, we're okay. All right. So. So, how does this theory affect our practice of professional communication? Now, part of our program is that you are preparing yourselves to be professionals or trained people in organizations, in your community, around issues of communication. So what does the fact of having, we'll ask this question progressively about spiral of silence, adaptive structuration theory, about standpoint theory. We want to make sure we can make those connections, because that's what you're going to have to do with your thing. So what does this theory do for you if you're in public relations or organizational communication? What insights does it give you? What recommendations does it have for you in what you do, Arthur?
Well, I mean, it makes you more aware of what you say and how you present what you say to certain people, because not everyone's used to either certain biases or any racism you may get from either identifying yourself with different sexual identity or even color or whatever. So you need to be more careful in what you say around certain people. Okay, so it tunes you in to being more sensitive, more aware that people are living in different worlds than you are. So you communicate in more careful ways.
It also teaches you that in organizational situations that maybe it might be more better to have like teams of management persons that are from different backgrounds or different cultures and even different sexes to help get communication across to the group as a whole. Okay, so in an OrgComm setting, it might recommend to us that managers work in teams to manage groups of people, because if there's a variety of standpoints within that group, you need more experience to work with them. All right, so there's another application of it.
I was going to say it would inspire maybe research, a little more research of your audience.
Okay, so from a rhetorical perspective, you realize that I may think I know how to present this, but I ought to check it against different standpoints.
Or broaden your research.
Broaden my research. Encounter the horizons of other people. The way we say it in grad studies is that you have, and I may have done this already with you here, where'd my chalk go, is that each of us has a horizon based on our language. Did I do this with you? Each of us has a horizon. We see some things and we think some things and we don't think other things. So another person, the child labor in India has another whole experience of life, another whole language. And it may intersect ours at some points, but it might be very small. But so when we enter into dialogue with this other person, we begin to try to see the world somewhat from their perspective. We'll never fully get it straight, but we can expand our horizon. This is Gadamer phenomenology, philosophical hermeneutics, that we expand our ability to perceive the world in more complex ways. And that then gives us more ability or power, really, to interact with the world.
Do you think that someone who started out down low, at least economically, then kind of worked their way up, and now they're rich and comfortable, they have a better perspective?
Yes. I have no question about that. For me, I think that's true. I'm a little prejudiced on that one, because I was the first one in my family to go to college. None of my relatives went to college. They were all laborers. I worked as a laborer for a lot of years. I changed car tires to go to graduate school. So I was in South Carolina sweating, working in a tire shop. And I saw the world way differently than a lot of the people who are coming in with cars. And then finally get my doctorate, I teach, I have, you know, so I have a whole different, yeah. So I think so. I think a broad experience. Travel does that for people too, if you go with an, you know, a careful mind open.
So, since you know, went through different stages, how do you keep like your children more aware of where you've been? So, because I guess that's the ideal situation. Because if your children don't understand the whole background of where you started and where you've gone to, and they're living in a more comfortable environment.
How do you keep your kids aware? Yeah, well, that's a good point. And we did it by telling them stories and taking them to places. You know, you tell and you take them to where you worked, and they'll never fully understand it, but you try to do it. But yeah, I don't. That's kind of a whole other.
Well, actually, I'm saying that keeps the cycle of having standpoints where you're unaware of other.
Well, you try to experience. You know, when youth, those of you who work with youth groups or things like that, community groups of youth, you realize that one of the things you try to do with them is to get them into other cultural settings. You take them to a setting that's different than they're used to. You take them down, like Habitat for Humanity. I know a lot of people work with Habitat for Humanity. So you go to New Orleans and you build some houses. Well, you encounter a whole different perspective on life. You broaden your perspective. My daughter, when she was at USC, spent a summer in a Native American reservation doing work. You know, so you try to get those experiences.
I feel like that's true because I feel like with my family, I've went like all these different places. I've had all these different jobs, and like then with my boyfriend's family, like I feel like his parents like babied him, like they still baby him.
Right.
And I feel like the way I think as opposed to the way he thinks is so different.
Right.
That like we're always like arguing about like little things because like I still work from like a bigger perspective and he thinks that he sees it.
Right. So you're much better off. The broader your experience, the more other standpoints you've encountered and dialogued with or interacted with, you're much better to do public relations. Because if you have this arrogant attitude about public relations, well, I know how it is and I know this is the way it should be, other people are not there. So you have to think carefully about that. Right, so there are other places from which people come. Physical appearance and status, the cheerleader syndrome, right? Girls, women experience the world in highly different ways depending on what social groups they are in. Whether you're in, whether you're out, you know, you're going to experience the world way different. So physical appearance and status. Economics, national development. If you live in a country, I have friends from Africa, from Nigeria, from Liberia, from Ghana. And, you know, if you grow up in an area where there are child soldiers, you know, and there are teenagers killing people in the streets, and there's corruption everywhere, and all this kind of stuff, your perspective on the world is highly different than people in this country. So you look at things entirely different that way. Human trafficking issues, which we're going to go into, but in our time, especially religious views give people different standpoints from which they view the world. And fundamentalisms and extremisms become major issues for us today, where you have extremists who will use violence to communicate. And so how does that work? Now let me show you a video that just maybe will get us into thinking about other people's experience of the world and of life. This is from BBC. It's a recent thing that comes from, any of you are Mac, Apple people, use QuickTime a lot, iTunes, you know, all that stuff. Yeah, well, they're putting out some HD clips these days, and this was one that I watched, and it made me think about what kind of a standpoint is a person who grows up in this setting going to have. So let me I think I can get this to work right with sound too. Had it working before. All right, now you are growing into a time of globalization, and a lot of the work that your companies or your jobs are going to do are going to involve people from China, probably. So watching that and thinking about standpoint theory, what comes to your mind? Can you make any connections between what you just saw, the fact that you're going to work in communication in a global setting, and what you saw? What are you thinking?
One thing that I really noticed was, they had, I guess, like a lot of dichotomies, because it was like, very traditional and very modern, very agricultural and very, manufacturer and, factories and stuff like that. And I kept seeing, you see me play the back and forth between these.
Okay. So if I grow up, I'm growing up in China, in that kind of a setting. I have now a perspective on the world. I have a place from which I see the world. And it's going to be different from the place you see the world from. And so when I'm doing public relations with you, or I'm working in a team, organizational team with you, standpoint theory is going to say to me, well, before I try to do all this stuff, I'd better make some perspective connections here. I'd better understand what's going on with these people because they're living in an entirely different setting than I'm living in. So I'd encourage you to stay in tune, try to make those connections with the people you professionally will be working with. Any other thoughts or comments about that? Anything stand out to you about the world that someone who grows up in that is going to be experiencing different from the world that you're experiencing?
A good movie for that is Going Home. Have you ever seen it?
No, no.
It's old and it's very basic, but it's exactly that.
So it's
Japanese car makers coming into
to the United States, and then American management and Japanese working.
It shows the home differences also.
Yeah.
About how the Japanese women get up and walk off the table as soon as the dinner is done.
Yeah.
The American women just kind of hang out and want to talk, and that.
Okay, right. So different perspectives on the world. Be very aware, though, of the differences between Asian cultures. I'll just clue you in on that if you don't think about that much. The mainland Chinese are significantly different from Taiwanese Chinese, or very different from Koreans, or very different from Japanese. So don't get this monolithic idea about Asian people. It's very, very. My brother lives in Japan and works in Japan, and so it's very, very different setting. All right, now I want to also, while we're talking about standpoints, show you this. This is from Trafficking in Persons Report, June 2007, from the United States State Department. And I don't know how many of you realize this, that we have an office devoted to human trafficking issues. Human trafficking issues. Ashley, you're familiar with this? You want to talk about it a little bit?
Just that even there's a lot of trafficking just coming into the U.S., not even like in other countries.
Okay.
They're just they're taking a lot of kids from like rural areas and promising to take them over to the United States, and then they're using them as sexual slaves sometimes and selling them out. Right.
So you have the sexual slavery issue. You have forced labor issues. You have a number of different industries, and they're all noted in this report. Condoleezza Rice, which was interesting for me thinking about this, because Condoleezza Rice, from the perspective of the book, would have been an African-American woman. But now here she is speaking on behalf of the trafficking, which is the new major issue for us. So she experiences the world significantly differently. But this goes through labor, involuntary service, through debt bondage, which has to do with, I've brought you over here, you owe me work. And this report is 240 pages long.
Yeah, I don't get it exactly. Is it like people from here getting getting someone and bringing them over here?
Well,
just because they brought them over to the U.S. and they're going to have somewhat of a better life here than anywhere else, and they owe that person.
Well, here's an example of a story. The State Department report is full of stories of what they're trying to get at. So, for instance, child soldiers in Burma. So this child says, I was recruited by force against my will. One evening while we were watching a video show in my village, 3 Army sergeants came. They checked whether we had ID cards. They asked if we wanted to join the Army. We explained that we were underage. I said no. But an Army recruitment unit arrived the next morning at my village, demanded 2 new recruits. Those who could not pay $9 had to join the Army. My parents could not pay, and altogether 19 of us were recruited and sent to an Army training center. So you have these children then who are recruited into the Army by force, unwillingly. And this happens throughout a number of countries. I'm mostly familiar with Liberia. And but there's a good movie. If any of you have watched Blood Diamond, it's an excellent look at this too, and some of the issues that are involved in that. So these people, what I want to get at here is from the point of standpoint theory, these people perceive the world from a place of marginalization and oppression. They are powerless. They are underadvantaged, and they are forced into situations where they have to survive in places against their will, where they are in other settings. This is brothels in Asian, where's this one? So it often happens for young girls and women that an employment agency will say, okay, we've got a job for you in another country. There's no jobs in our country. You can go work in a hotel industry, cleaning rooms, or we'll get you to be a hairdresser there. And they're recruited into brothels, and they have no way out of this kind of thing. Child sex trafficking out of Cambodia.
Big advocate against this is Ricky Martin, singer.
Okay. Yeah,
If you know of his involvement in this?
No. But again, these would be the people from, if you were to update Griffin's chapter, these would be the people who would be most likely to be seeing the world in a whole different place than an advantaged and privileged person. Let me get the video up, and then we'll finish with that, then go to muted group theory. This is a State Department video. Let's see if this will work. Or if I have to renew it. Okay, here we go.
12 days ago, assumed his duties as director of the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. And it's my pleasure to be here today to release that report. Human traffickers prey on the most vulnerable members of society, most often innocent women and children, exploiting and abusing them, and profiting from their suffering. The President's dedication to defending human dignity and advancing human freedom worldwide is at the center of our foreign policy. And as a result, we have made combating human trafficking a prominent and deeply felt commitment for the United States government.
We're going to watch about 5 minutes of this.
In my travels, I have noticed a greater desire by our partners to fight this crime and protect its victims. And across the globe, the United States is building new partnerships to rescue and shelter the victims. We are helping to lead a global movement not just to confront this crime, but to abolish it. More and more countries are coming to see human trafficking for what it is, a modern-day form of slavery that devastates families and communities around the world. Much of the growing desire to fight this crime is due in no small part to our annual Trafficking in Persons report. The report's purpose is to raise awareness, to highlight best practices, and to inspire governments to take action against trafficking. I am pleased that this year's report covers more countries than ever before, 164 in total. When we first began tackling this issue several years ago, the idea of human trafficking was akin to a global family secret. It was known, but not often discussed publicly. I am proud that our office in just a few short years has brought global attention to this problem. Millions more people know about human trafficking today than when the first report was issued in 2001, and we hope that this greater awareness translates into greater prevention. Yet, despite some successes, there have also been setbacks. You will see disturbing evidence in this report that prosecutions have leveled off everywhere. In some cases, there are countries with major human trafficking problems, but only a couple of traffickers have been brought to justice. This cannot and must not be tolerated. Despite these serious concerns, much in this year's report should give us hope. For example, Georgia, Hungary, Slovenia, and Israel have all made major improvements, as have Taiwan and countries like Indonesia, Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, and Jamaica. Wherever we encounter human trafficking, the United States stands ready to work with our partners around the world to right this wrong. We hope this report encourages responsible nations across the globe to stand together, to speak with one voice, and to say that freedom and security are non-negotiable demands of human dignity. And to say, as President Bush has, no one is fit to be a master, and no one deserves to be a slave. Thank you, and now I'll turn the podium over to Mark, our Ambassador at Large and the Director of the Office to Monitor and Combat Human Trafficking in Persons. Mark, and congratulations, welcome aboard.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Secretary Rice, and good morning. I'd like to offer an overview of what's in the report, and then after a few minutes, welcome your questions. It's an honor to succeed Ambassador John Miller as director of an extraordinary office dedicated to ending a deeply dehumanizing form of exploitation. Human trafficking, or trafficking in persons, is modern-day slavery. At the heart of U.S. efforts to end human trafficking is a commitment to human dignity. Every day, all over the world, people are coerced into bonded labor, bought and sold in prostitution, exploited in domestic servitude, enslaved in agricultural work and in factories, and captured to serve unlawfully as child soldiers. Estimates of the number vary widely. According to U.S. government estimates, approximately 800,000 people are trafficked across international borders each year, and about 80% of them are female. Up to half are minors. And these figures do not include millions who are trafficked into labor and sexual slavery within national borders. Stomach-wrenching individual stories, however, tell more than the aggregate numbers. And these are the people who motivate everyone active in the movement to abolish human trafficking. Let me tell you about one victim. At age 22, Comm left Burma with his new bride to find work in a neighboring country. He took a job on a fishing boat for 2 years because he was promised good money, $70 per month. But that boat stayed at sea for 3 years, and the workers were fed only fish and rice. Not getting enough vitamins, they began to starve. They were denied medical care or passage home. The good job turned out to be a floating death camp. One by one, the men began to perish, including Comm. His body was dumped overboard. So were the exhausted, malnourished bodies of 29 other modern-day slaves. 60 fishermen who survived weren't paid at all. Police refused to prosecute the employer since there are no bodies to prove a crime. In a climate of official indifference, with forced labor violations typically not criminalized, desperate migrant laborers are especially vulnerable to forced fraud and coercion.
All right, we'll stop there. So, so standpoint theory and communication. What do these reports make you think about in terms of connecting that theory with what we've been talking about? So these people are going to see the world differently, right? These people are going to see the world significantly differently.
Since I can see the world from where I am, with opportunities, I can do anything I want to. These people are going to go. I can't do what I want to. These people are going to control me. They're going to tell me what to do. My life's over, you know. It's totally different viewpoint than what we look at as being
Right.
an opportunity to go to school and do other things.
Right. So in a debate of whether we're in a better position to say how the world really is because we have, you know, more news and we have, or whether they're in a position to say how the world really is because they're marginalized and they're having to pay attention to how to survive, so they're more tuned into the actual dynamics of the world. Maybe the best answer is not to try to decide who's right about it, but to just work with a variety of perspectives. And if you're in organizational communication, you're in public relations, you're going to want to find ways to think carefully about the fact that people's experiences are way different than yours. And so, and the only way you're going to connect with that is not by trying to imagine it, but by reading their stories, talking with them, and seeing the world the way they see it. All right, so that's what we wanted to say about that theory. Okay, so other places from which, BBC China, places from which, right. So this trafficker